spring has sprung. It is 65 degrees here in Rockford, Illinois, and I am happy as Greg Gard, who just won the Big Ten title with 8 scholarship players, which is like half of as many scholarships as the Duke Blue Devils, who also probably pay their players and such, which Wisconsin, I assume, doesn't, at least not to the same degree. But anyways, that's beside the point here. What is magnificent as Greg Gard's balding head is Jason Perrone's gray beard. And Jason is here, and I think that was a half-hearted attempt at giving me the finger. So, Jason, thank you for not doing that. There are children watching this show, for God's sake. How are we doing today?
Good. We're about 10 degrees warmer than you are. I just want to throw that in your face.
Per usual.
As nice as it is by you, and same to you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just want to remind everybody that sneaky fact, we're approaching Jacob's 30th birthday, which actually is not till next year, but we're almost in the last 12 months of his 20s. So for all the old man jokes, Jake, the seat, I have got the nicest little place carved out for you on the old Fogey's couch. It's gonna look great. You're gonna look great in it as well.
Yeah, we've got 18 full months before that happens. Almost a season and maybe a game or two of Packers football before that happens too. So we got a long way to go. Joining with me also is Paul Brettel, repping those Milwaukee Brewers that made a big move this weekend, signing Christian Yelich. And Paul, just kind of walk me through what's that like seeing finally, typically I remember the last quote unquote star that was close to getting a contract for Milwaukee would have been like Jonathan Lucroy, and they traded him. And that's kind of typical, guys like Ryan Braun that sign extensions there are relatively rare for, well, that's a separate conversation I don't want to have. But anyways, what's that like? What's that like knowing that Yelich is around, and what was his press conference like? Because I got a little goosebumpy listening to him talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, the whole thing is fantastic, and I appreciate you stopping on Ryan Braun. This is a no Ryan Braun slander zone. But Christian Yelich staying in Milwaukee, it's huge for the Brewers. Just as a small market team, we don't typically see that in MLB. And for him to decide, he's 2 years from now, he had a club option. 3 years, he'd be a free agent if it was picked up. So for him, who could have likely earned, if he continues on kind of the same path that he's been on, likely earned way more than what he's going to make here in Milwaukee, knowing that he's likely going to spend the rest of his career here. It's just fantastic for the organization and the state, and I couldn't be more happy. Now in a few months, it's Giannis's turn.
That's right. And here you go, guys. For everybody that's listening, everybody that follows me on Twitter, write this down in an ink Sharpie pen. Giannis Antetokounmpo. Not this offseason, but next offseason will absolutely 100% re-sign with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's not going anywhere. Trust me when I say that. Not a Bucks fan, so I guess I have some vested interest if he decides he wants to come to Dallas. But I doubt that is the case, even though that would be freaking awesome to see him paired with Luka and KP. Milwaukee is Giannis's home, and it's going to be that way for quite some time. Speaking of homes, Jimmy Graham, that is the news, is likely to be looking for a new one. There is no official news as of yet that Graham will be on the market, but the Packers are expected to move on from him. That's been tweeted a couple different times. Rob Domofsky said it, but they've also said that, that's not official as of yet. Guys, I mean, real quick, this is not remotely surprising. I guess the first thing that I want to see is, Paul, when I ask you about Jimmy Graham, what comes to mind from his 2 years in Green Bay?
Unfortunately, it's, disappointing. On an average year basis, he was the highest paid tight end over that span. And when we got him, we knew that he wasn't going to be the same, physical, athletic Jimmy Graham from his New Orleans days. But, obviously I still had the hope that he was going to be more of a factor in the red zone, especially. But we even saw little things like drops that just kept rearing their ugly head. And, it's a shame it didn't work out, just unfortunate. But overall, I think the first word that comes to mind is just kind of disappointing.
Jason, what about you?
He had a lot of opportunities. They just couldn't turn into anything. So yeah, I mean, it didn't end up being worth the money, but I don't blame the Packers for wanting to find a better solution than the last attempt that they made to bring in a veteran tight end. So yeah, I mean, you're not going to make every shot, and they're not all going to be home runs. So now, fortunately, because it wasn't, we have a show to do and we have something to talk about.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham is kind of the cautionary tale of free guys like Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith and the guys that Green Bay went out and got last offseason. Those are rare examples like that where you sign a free agent and it just works out so well like that. Uh, I don't blame Jimmy for the contract he got. That's obviously not his fault. There were multiple teams. Green Bay wasn't the only one. It's not like Green Bay came in and said, we're the only ones that'll pay you this much. New Orleans was in on him as well. Seattle made a bid to re sign him, although maybe not as high of a contract. But New Orleans was certainly in the bidding like that to bring him back. So it's unfortunate. Graham never really made his mark here in Green Bay. If you really think about it, his best game as a Packer was probably the playoff win over Seattle, where he had the game clinching catch and two other big catches. But other than that, there just wasn't a whole lot of good. Well, I shouldn't say a whole lot of good, but he had some nice moments, but he never really put his stamp on this team as someone to rely on. And that's what Green Bay's looking for. That's what they need. So Jimmy Graham will be hitting the open market, and I wish him well wherever he goes. Personally, I'm not one of those weirdos that holds grudges against somebody for not living up to their contract. That happens all the time, and there can be a lot of reasons for that. Jimmy just frankly is past his prime at this point. So he will be moving on. Someone who won't be moving on is Austin Eckler of the Los Angeles Chargers. He got a new 4-year contract with about $13 million guaranteed and worth just a little bit over $6 million annually I always do that. The Los Angeles Chargers. And that's not really news related to the Packers unless you look a little bit deeper and think about a conversation we had not that long ago where we were talking about Aaron Jones. And there's obviously, as mentioned previously, the mutual interest in signing a contract extension to keep him in Green Bay. Those numbers are ones to keep an eye on. There's a couple running backs hitting free agency this year. Derrick Henry, of course, being the big one. Melvin Gordon being the other one of just names to keep an eye on that could be in that mold of the contract that Aaron Jones could be looking to receive next offseason. So, Paul, I ask you this now. If Green Bay is able to get away with a contract similar to that one, are you comfortable with that? And where do we get to the line in the sand portion for Aaron Jones?
Yeah, I would definitely be comfortable with that. I think Eckler's 4 years, 24 million, so breaks down to about 6 million per year, or a little over that with some extra dollars figured in. I mean, Aaron Jones was the lifeblood of this offense last season. When they made the decision to run it through him, it looked completely different, and obviously in a good way. And looking ahead to the upcoming offseason, or this offseason, we assume that they're going to add receivers to the mix, which obviously helps improve the passing game. But it's tough to imagine what this offense would look like without him at this point. And there would have to be a very drastic change in 2020 for me to feel comfortable with him walking. So if they can get him in the $6-7 million range, I say go for it. To me, that's a no-brainer. I would even go as high as probably $8 million a year, just because of how big of a factor that he is to this offense. And he's not just a runner; he's shown that he can be a pass catcher as well. He was Rodgers' number one target in the passing game during that stretch when Devontae Adams was out. But I guess the one question I have in all of this is, if you're from Aaron Jones' perspective, and say it is $8 million per year is what it would average out to, you're 1 year away from hitting the open market. Zeke Elliott hit 15 million last year. We think Derrick Henry is going to eclipse that amount. I'm not saying Jones is going to be in that stratosphere, but if he can put together a similar season in 2020, all of a sudden 8 million on a contract extension versus waiting a year. And obviously there's risks involved. Maybe has a down season, gets hurt again, whatever it may be. But now all of a sudden he might be in the, who knows, 10, 12, $13 million range, I think is reasonable. So from his perspective, I think that's something that you have to weigh. But to go back to your question, if the Packers can get him at 6-7 million a year for another 4 years, I think you should do that.
So, Jason, let me put you in Aaron Jones' shoes. If you are Aaron Jones and the Packers come to you with an offer, let's just say 4 years, $30 million and $18 million guaranteed, just for number's sake, that's relatively similar to the contract that you just heard for Austin Eckler. Is that something that you take now, or are you, as the saying goes, betting on yourself, seeing what Derrick Henry does to the market, seeing what Melvin Gordon does to the market, and going from there?
I was going to say the guaranteed money is important, but I think Jones is young enough, and he probably got a huge boost of confidence from the way he played this past season that he would like to give himself a better opportunity, or at least an opportunity to know that that's the best deal that he's going to have. Now, the Packers obviously are probably going to put some sort of a caveat or expiration on their offer, so he can't just sit there throughout the entire free agency period and ponder it and leave him hanging, because they've got to figure out what they need to do in the draft and in free agency. Matt LaFleur already said it would be nice that they're already looking to add another running back to the stable. Clearly, Dexter Williams is not their top option as a third back going into this next season. So the Packers are already looking to make a move, but if they need to replace an Aaron Jones, that's a big thing that they're going to have to do. So I don't know. If I'm Green Bay, you don't want to top out the market, but I think you have to put together an offer that's got good guaranteed money, and maybe instead of backloading it like I think they have preferred to do in recent years, maybe they front load it for Jones. I mean, you don't pay a player for past performance, and there's no thank you money in the league. But he was a big part of the offense. I like the fact that they're talking, and I do want Aaron Jones back. I'm not one of those absolutely not, don't pay a running back under any circumstance. But they're going to probably have to change the structure of their contract a little bit if he's going to take a slightly below market value deal from them to stick around and stay there and not have to uproot his family and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I think the market is what will be interesting, because we mentioned Derrick Henry, and I don't think that's something that Jones can ask for, quite frankly, because Derrick Henry's coming off a year where he led the league in rushing and was the best offensive player on a team that he basically carried them through 2 playoff games. I mean, his timing was absolutely phenomenal for those performances. I think Melvin Gordon is more where you're looking, because Gordon kind of an interesting case, I guess, just because he came to the year as a holdout, didn't play for 8 games, and then showed up and then didn't have as good of a year as he'd hoped. But that might be a number that's closer to it. But if I'm Jones, I got a hard time. I mean, unless he just goes bonkers next season, and touchdowns aren't a great metric, because, I mean, I know that's great. Obviously, the goal of the running back is to put the ball in the end zone eventually. But the Packers have more fish to fry, so to speak. So I'd be curious to see how he looks at that. I can tell you this, between Jones and Williams, the Packers will be looking to replace one of them in this year's draft and probably next year's draft too, because Matt LaFleur, like Jason mentioned, has said the Packers need a third running back, and I agree with him. I think that there's room for other guys. Irvin is more of a specialist. Dexter Williams, I think they've told you everything that the coaching staff thinks about him throughout this course. So adding some competition to him may not be a bad thing, but I'll be curious to see how that goes. This is a conversation we've had several different times. I'm not a don't pay running backs ever, but I'm a pay running backs very, very rarely. And it's not a contract that I am looking to, or I'm not, if he asks for a Zeke's contract or somebody like that, then see you later. I appreciate your 4 years in Green Bay and wish you luck somewhere else. But this episode is about the state of the tight end position and the tight end position in this upcoming NFL draft. We kind of addressed some of the tight end position with the departure or expected departure of Jimmy Graham. Marseilles Lewis is a free agent. Jay Sternberger is a 3rd-round pick from a year ago, and Robert Tonyan is a preseason darling with not a whole lot to show on the field just yet, but that's something that he's an exclusive rights free agent. They'll probably bring him back. So let's, for the sake of the argument here, we're going to assume that the tight ends on the roster as of right now are Jay Sternberger and Robert Tonyan. My first question is very simple. Does Marseilles Lewis come back? And Jason, we've talked about this a little bit too, but I'm asking you now formally, is Marseilles Lewis part of this plan in 2020?
I think he will be. He was for what he was asked to do, he was a good blocker, good veteran presence. There's a lot of value to a guy like that for a contract that's not going to be huge, break the bank. And if he's going to come back and play another season, I would have to think Green Bay's got a huge leg up over any other team that would want to bring him in, just simply because he's been there for 2 years already. And if he's going to play a 3rd year and it's going to be special, better to be in a situation you're familiar with and that you can do more in. So I think he'd be back, and maybe not as fast, as quickly as many of us think, or he might be more of a summer roster addition, or I shouldn't say summer, but before mini camps and all that kind of stuff. Not the first day of free agency, but yeah, I think he's back.
Yeah, I think that's one of those. He'll be a pre-draft or a post-draft signing. See if they can find a way to get younger, find a way to get more athletic, and if they don't, or can't, or whatever the case is, then they bring back Marseilles in like June or May or something, just so he's still there for your off-season program, so to speak, but definitely not a priority free agent to me. I know that people have talked about his leadership and his presence in the locker room, and that's all great, but that's worth like $2 million. So if he wants to play for $2 million, come on in. That's great. If he wants anything more than that, then God bless you, Marseilles. I appreciate it. See you later. Paul,
is there a veteran minimum? I was going to ask about that too. So if they sign him, is there any consideration there that they'd have to give?
As far as the vets minimum, yeah, there is. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I know it's under $1 million.
Okay.
I think it's 750,000, but I could be wrong on that. But it's not a big contract, and he'll get more than that. Just because I doubt that he'll get a pay cut after last season. They'll give him some of that. You said thank you money doesn't exist, but there is a little bit at least. There's no big thank you monies, though. I do agree with that. Paul, is Lewis back on this team? And, when do you anticipate a move like that taking place?
I definitely think that there's a clear path for him to be back. Jason hit on a lot of the points. His leadership, he's a proven, he's past his prime, but he's a proven and willing blocker, which we know is important to Matt LaFleur and playing tight end. He knows the offense, and I think there definitely is a lot of value in bringing a veteran in. I mentioned earlier before we started recording, Sternberger's in year 2, Tanyan's in year 3, I believe, but that's a very young year 3. And tight end's one of the more difficult positions to transition to from college to the NFL. So I think there's a lot of value in having a veteran. And I do think there's a clear path, but as you said, Jason, I think they're going to explore other opportunities, in free agency. Someone like a Darren Fells, perhaps. He's 34 years old. Spot Track has him getting a 1-year, $4 million deal. He was in the passing game last year. He was a good red zone target for the Deshaun Watson and the Texans, had 7 touchdowns. So I could see them maybe going somewhere along that route where a little bit more of a dynamic presence in the passing game. But if it doesn't work out with Fells or whoever else is on their radar, that was just one example, then yes, I definitely think there's a clear path to Lewis. He's just probably not option 1 or maybe even 2.
That would be interesting because I tend to think he's back even if they go big game hunting, if you will, at the tight end position. So that leads me into the next point. We talked about this a little bit last week. News has already surfaced that the Packers are interested in Austin Hooper. Hooper obviously has played with Matt LaFleur before, knows the offense, knows the system. That would be the big fish, if you will. Hunter Henry's not going to be available. There are some other interesting names. I mentioned Tyler Eifert in pre-show, but he's somebody he's never been healthy. And with the way that the Packers have tended to treat that, especially under Gutekunst, it just doesn't seem like something that is likely at this point that they pursue somebody with an injury history like Eifert's, and that's probably for the best. So I say all that to say, guys, the Packers have been really, when they've signed free agents, even under Ted Thompson in recent memory, it was tight ends. Jared Cook, hurt for most of the season, had a good last 6, 7, 8 games if you include the postseason. Then, of course, they signed number 80, who I won't name after that. They cut him after he quit on the team. And then after he quits on the team, they cut him and signed Jimmy Graham. And Jimmy Graham obviously is going to be let go. He didn't work out either. So the question I have is, Jason, does any of that stuff worry you when it comes to Green Bay fishing for yet another free agent tight end?
No, those guys are in different points in their career. If it's a Hooper type guy, that's a different story. You're not trying to, plug a hole. You're trying to actually create a solution. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be a better way to approach it. I'm much better for it. And I think tight end's one of those positions because of the multiple things that they're asked to do and that they have to do. And from what we've seen young players transitioning from college into the NFL be able to do early in their career, you got to keep swinging at it. I mean, learn from your mistakes, but you got to keep swinging at it because eventually they'll get it right. Another name I heard was, and it's going to be really difficult because, you'd have to, is OJ Howard with Tampa, and is he going to be on the move because he hasn't been utilized much in the offense there? I mean, what is it going to take to get a player of that caliber? Those types of guys, I think, is who you go after at this point. You're not, don't look to go after the guy that's in the waning years of his career. They've got to get more dynamic at the position. So I think they've got the right approach if they're looking at younger guys who are free agents.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that, the guys that I mentioned were either 30 or above, or in Jared Cook's case, he was younger. And the Packers, I mean, there's no way around it. They made a mistake by letting Cook walk or allowing that conversation to go the way that it did. The understanding that I've gathered is basically that Cook had a contract offer on the table. He wanted a couple $1 million extra, and the Packers basically said, "Okay, we're going to go with somebody else." And then Packers went from there to sign that guy and Lance Kendricks, and then that didn't work out. But with Hooper, this guy's not a dynamic game breaker. He is he's about as consistent as they come, I think, honestly. He's a pretty good blocker. He can make some plays with the ball in his hands, but nobody's going to mistake this guy for Rob Gronkowski in his prime. And that's okay. The Packers don't need somebody like that. But, Paul, the idea, and again, I'm just discussing big game hunting. I know Jason mentioned O.J. Howard. I would plug him under unlikely just because, like Jason mentioned, the price tag is unsure. And at this point, are we sure O.J. Howard's good? Like, I know that his draft pedigree was great, and I know a lot of people on the internet thought he was a generational tight end, but this is 2 coaching staffs now that haven't really found a way to use him, and maybe they're not finding a way to use him because he's not very good. That's certainly a possibility. Now, I'm not saying that it's possible that the teams are overlooking him. That's certainly a possibility as well. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but let's just talk about the idea of pairing Hooper and Sternberger. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but just what would that bring to Matt LaFleur's offense and Aaron Rodgers? Actually, that didn't.
I think.
Oh, yeah, it did. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Paul. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Okay. I think Hooper and Sternberger would be a nice combo together. Obviously Hooper's going to dominate the snaps, but I don't see that being an issue. I know everyone's really excited about Sternberger. Gutekunst had good things to say about him. Mercedes Lewis had good things to say about him. And I'm excited about him as well. But as I referenced earlier, tight end's a tough position to transition to. And if you can have a proven player like Hooper step in, and be kind of the go-to guy while Sternberger's still developing, I don't see that being a problem at all. And like you mentioned, Jacobs, Hooper, while he's not going to, have the blazing speed or pick up the yards after the catch, he's been super reliable over his career. He's got 78% of the passes thrown his way. The last 3 years, he's seen his total receptions and yards increase. He's got 1,300 yards the last 2 years. But one thing is, when you're getting Hooper, that you're getting more of a pass-catching tight end. Let's see here, last year he only had 35 pass-blocking attempts, but he has that versatility. Sternberger, he's shown that he can potentially become a big factor in the passing game as well, but he's also shown that he's a willing blocker. So Hooper's going to take, a majority, or not a majority, but he's going to be tight end 1 next year. And I don't see that being a bad thing with Sternberger as he continues to develop. And I mean, what a great player to be able to learn from, especially when it comes to the passing game.
Yeah, that's somebody that you talk about, somebody was like, oh, you got people saying, bring back Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis. They helped with Jay Sternberger and learning how to be a professional. Well, it'd be nice to pay for somebody that can not only do that, but maybe be a contributor too. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. Ultimately, I think that there are some other teams that are a little more desperate, like the Chicago Bears, for a tight end that I think will just eventually outbid Green Bay. But I'll be interested to see how that goes. The only other name that I think they could realistically pursue on the free agent market is Eric Ebron. And Matt Schneidman of The Athletic has said that that's his bold prediction, that Green Bay signs Eric Ebron. And whatever. I just I don't think he's all that good. He had one good season where he had 100 plus targets. He had 60 some odd catches. He had 13 touchdowns, which was great. But other than that, now 2 teams have given up on him in the span of 3 years. So I don't see that as somebody that fits here in Green Bay. So I'll be curious to see how that works and how that continues to work. But ultimately, this is about the draft, and we're going to move towards that portion of the show where we talk about the draft class, which is the tight ends, which is done by some devilishly handsome man named Jacob Westendorf in the Cheesehead TV Draft Guide. So be sure to check that out. It is $6.99 for a pre-order. Links are out now, so be sure to find that, and we'll be able to get you that guide. It's newsstand worthy. But guys, the first question I have, and it's the same formats here, is obviously what round, if any, are you looking for a tight end? In mine, the 3rd round at the earliest, because ultimately I think this tight end class stinks. There's some guys that can play a little bit. I like Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue. I like Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. And there's some other guys. The Bryant brothers, both of them, I think, can do some nice things. But, there is my tight end 1 this year, for example, and I'll suppose a spoiler alert, is Bryson Hopkins of Purdue. And he would have been tight end 4 tight end 5 in last year's draft. Now, obviously, last year's draft, you had Hockenson, you had Fant, you had Irv Smith, and you had Jay Sternberger. I had Sternberger as 3, Smith as 4. But that's where tight end 1 would come in. So this class is definitely not like last year's, where there were some immediate contributors. Guys like Noah Fant had a good year. Hockenson had a couple good games before he got injured. Sternberger, we've talked about as somebody that could break out. And Irv Smith did some nice things for the Vikings as well. It just takes a while at that position. But yeah, like I mentioned, 3rd round at the earliest. And even then, I'm not so sure that I would spend a top 100 pick on somebody like that. Paul, is there a round that you're looking for a tight end in this year's draft class?
No, not in particular. I mean, if the board ends up falling a certain way, once you get to the maybe 5th round or so, then I would be more open to it. But I don't think that they have to take a tight end this year. We want them, or they have to take, a tackle, a wide receiver, a linebacker at some point. Those might fall under the have to or should. I don't necessarily see tight end being there. So for me, it'd probably be, 5th round at the earliest. They have Jay Sternberger on the roster. Robert Tonyan, we're going to assume's on there as well. So those are 2 young guys. And like I said earlier, I just think there's a tremendous value in adding a veteran or 2 to the mix rather than another young tight end who, as we've mentioned already, it's a tough position to transition to. Jacob, you hit the nail on the head. There was all that buzz last year around TJ Hockenson and Noah Fant. And, tight ends in rookie years, they just don't go out and put up even 500-600 yards receiving typically. So there's just a transition period. I think with what they have going with young guys and Sternberger and Tonyan is a good start, but I would prefer to see a veteran and then at least the first 4 or 5 draft picks go towards other positions.
Yeah, the Hockenson thing made me chuckle because after he had his first game, and it was great, he was huge in his first game. And some of the people on the internet, Hockenson was like a darling of draft Twitter. Like, people wanted to make him a top 10 pick, which he ultimately was, oddly enough, by the Detroit Lions. But people taking victory laps as if this guy is slated to be in the Hall of Fame by tomorrow. And he ended up he played 10 games, if I recall correctly. And that was really it for his big time production in Green Bay. So I'll be curious to see how he does in year 2. But the fetishizing last year of his run blocking, I thought was a little ridiculous. But there's nobody like that in this year's draft, and that's why the situation is the way that it is. And I'm appreciative that Green Bay got their tight end last year, because this year, if they needed one, I think they're in a little bit of trouble. Jason, is there a round that specifically you're saying that, okay, they could probably take one here?
Because I can't skip a chance to take a shot at a certain NFL franchise. I just want to remind everybody that TJ Hawkinson's first NFL game in a regular season was against the Arizona Cardinals. So he very easily could have caught 20 passes for 250 yards and 5 touchdowns, and nobody would have been surprised. So in any event, except for Cardinals fans who clearly would act surprised, but because that's how they are. All right. For me, it's later. So later rounds, that's fine. I think we've kind of talked about the reasons why. Go after a veteran this year is a good. Not only is it better to bring one in because the productivity, and Paul, you mentioned, and Jake, you mentioned too, like the numbers just aren't great coming right out and there isn't anybody really that's worthwhile this year. So the Packers must have seen this coming. I mean, it's not like, they don't look ahead a draft or two and know what they want to do a couple of years from now. They had to have seen this was coming, and they spent the third rounder on Sternberger. I don't expect them to do it this year. Now, if they go fourth round, fifth round, to me, anything beyond 3 is a dart throw anyway. So that's fine. I just, I selfishly want to see them get some impact players on offense and add that for me would be receivers. We wouldn't put a tight end in. There is no tight end that's going to be a great wideout in this draft that could take the place of a receiver. I've seen some tight ends mocked to Green Bay early. I don't understand that. So mid to late rounds for me, bring somebody in if you want to give them a shot. You've got Tanyan as a little bit of a security blanket there. So it's not like the cupboard is completely bare, but they've tipped their hand. It's obvious the Packers are going to be in the market for a tight end. So hopefully they can get one at a good value.
Yeah. And hopefully that is a veteran instead of a young guy. Cause like we mentioned, not a whole lot great in this class, but who are some popular guys in that round? I mentioned some of mine earlier, so I don't need to talk too much. Jason, are there any guys that stand out?
No, I mean, for me, beyond Kmet, there wasn't anybody really that, and he's probably going to go before the middle round. So the Packers are going to be, they're going to be taking a guy that we're not talking about or haven't heard of right now at this point, because it's, like I said, I hope it's later in the draft, and just depends on how far you want to go into your analysis. Now, obviously I will, because I'm going to be buying the Cheesehead TV draft guide to read all of your great work and the great work that everybody else does. So I just want to give a quick plug for the Cheesehead TV draft guide, because I contributed to it one year and it's been an annual thing every year, and it truly is Packer centric. So if you're looking for the holy grail of how do I get rid of all the other crap and focus on my team, this is it. So definitely get on and pre-order it, because Jake, I don't know what this price bumps up to after the pre-order.
Just under $10, I think. I'd have to check that to be sure. Paul, is there anybody that you have that you're looking at in some of those rounds that you mentioned earlier?
No, I mean, to put it honestly, similar to what Jason said, one guy that I do kind of like is Hunter Bryant. He had, I think, almost 900 receiving yards last year, 16 yards per catch, showing that he can make an impact in the passing game. But he's going to be off the board before I'm even looking, if I'm the Packers, if I'm, actively looking, or if a tight end falls to the 5th round or whatever it may be. So at that point, no, I don't have any dark horses off the top of my head. But like you said, the Bryants, they can be game change or have the potential to be good weapons in the passing game, but they're all going to be off the board before I'm looking.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting pieces that you could be had later. Josiah DeGuara out of Cincinnati is one, if you want to start looking a little bit later. Colby Parkinson is another one. There's a few guys, but yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of these guys that Green Bay is going to be targeting, you mentioned, are pretty much, dart throw project types. I don't think that they'll be in the market. I know Matt Miller has Green Bay slated to pick Cole Kmet and is at 30 in his mock draft, and I can't picture that. I know Green Bay's in the market for a tight end. They've been rumored to be attached to the free agents. The position's important in Matt LaFleur's offense. I understand that, but it's just not something that I can picture Green Bay doing early in a draft class where the early tight ends just, frankly, I don't think are very good, especially compared to last year where you had 2 top 20 picks. Irv Smith was a top 50 pick, and then after that, Jay Sternberger went in the top. I think he went 76th. I could be wrong on that, but it was in the top 100. So you've got guys like that. But you guys have mentioned a couple dudes. Harrison Bryant is one that I'm interested in. Hunter Bryant I'm also interested in. I think they can do some interesting things. But overall, like I said, kind of a underwhelming class. So on that note then, guys, we've talked about it. What's the likelihood that they spend in the first 5 rounds one of their picks on a tight end? And I'm going to say 20%, because I think that if they are going to spend on a free agent or a tight end, it'll be in free agency. I don't think they're going to love this draft class too much there. I think there's depth at receiver. I think there's depth at offensive tackle. And I think those are the positions that they're going to spend some time on, maybe some defensive line help, maybe some linebacker help in that as well, and then some cornerbacks. And now there you have it. There's 5 positions that I just named, and Green Bay probably isn't going to wait until the 6th round to address offensive tackle, for example. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. But yeah, I'm at 20%. I don't think it's a very high chance. Jason, what do you think? Chances they spend a pick in that early part of the game?
Yeah, 20 at the most, 15 to 20%. I'm selfishly projecting what I hope they do, and I'm hoping by the time they get to the 5th round, the 6th round maybe, but by the time they get to the 5th round that they've stocked up on some more important things like the middle of their defense and wide receiver.
So there you have that. And Paul?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Just to be different, I'll go 10%. Jacob, you hit the nail on the head when we look at needs that they have. Tight end's one of them, as we mentioned, but like we all said, we think that free agency should be the route for that. Then you have linebacker, receiver, tackle, running back, cornerback, interior defensive lineman. Those are all positions that I hope to see get drafted before I would see a tight end. So I'll go 10%.
So not very high. You're not looking. This ain't the position for that kind of stuff. So that's going to do it for this edition of Pulse of the Pack. Be sure to check us out on our Twitter handle. It is at Packer Pulse. You can follow us on YouTube, Pulse of the Pack, with the beautiful logo made by Jeremy Vanderlinden of Cheesehead TV Live, friend of Jason Perone, and I suppose I know him as well. He's all right. But that's where we're at on that. You can follow Jason. He's at Jason Perone. You can follow Paul. He's at Paul_Brettel. You can follow me. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. And next week, we will have offensive linemen, the big uglies for you guys. But before that, I will be in Green Bay next week. So I'm going to say hello to the stadium, and maybe I'll get to say hello to Paul as well. So
if you're lucky.
If I'm lucky, I'll be looking forward to that. So thank you guys for listening, of course, and watching. And as always, 100% of the time, go Pack, go.